I don't think we make minds. I don't think we create consciousness. I don't think we do it when we make an embryo. I don't think we do it when we make an AI or an embedded robotic system. I facilitate the ingression of certain patterns from that Platonic space, and this is where we get to a completely, sort of different theory of consciousness. For the exact same reasons you attribute consciousness to some other beings, you should be very serious about attributing it to other organs and tissues of your body for the exact same reasons. I think all living material, and probably lots of non-living material, has some kind of experience, but being able to say what that is requires a lot of work that hasn't been done yet.
Dr. Michael Levin is one of the most groundbreaking scientists alive, and if you watch this whole episode, you will understand exactly why. His team co-created the Xenobot, the world's first living programmable organism, made entirely from frog skin and heart cells. These tiny microscopic systems can move around their petri dish and, astonishingly, under certain conditions, create little piles of cells and build copies of themselves.
I absolutely think that Xenobots have an inner perspective. Watching the kinematic replication was one of the most, unbelievable things. That why, they can't reproduce in the normal frog-like fashion, and so, but they figured out a new way of doing it. If you provide them with loose skin cells, they will corral them and make the next generation of bot, which will then go on to do the same thing. It reminds us how insufficient current paradigms, the incredible capacities of the agential material of life, the multi-scale agendas that exist in life at all levels, and the problem solving that comes with it. No, we couldn't have predicted that. And in fact, no one could have predicted that.
It's long been assumed that cognition, memory, learning, and even consciousness emerge at the level of the complex organism like you and I. Yet, Michael Levin's lab is completely dismantling this idea. He's showing that it's far more radical and a million times more amazing. That biology is cognition the whole way down.
We found there's some hundreds of genes that are upregulated. Some of them are in this cluster related to hearing. And we thought, well, that's pretty weird. Why would you do that? Well, what could they possibly hear? And so we tried. We stuck a speaker under the dish, and we found that, when you turn on certain sounds, their behavior changes very, sort of detectively. And then when you cut off the sound, they go back almost to what they were doing before. So they could certainly sense that. If you take a bunch of human neurons and you grow them on a lawn on a petri dish, and you take a scalpel and you put a big scratch through it, so like a wound. You put the Anthropobots in. They sort of run around. Some of them will find the wound. They settle at a particular location in the wound. They form this larger structure we call a superbot cluster, which might have, 8 to 10 bots. And 4 days later, you lift them up and you see what they were doing while they were sitting there is they're knitting the two sides together. So they were actually healing the gap. Like who would have known that your tracheal cells that sit there quietly in your airway dealing with, pollen and whatnot, have the ability to run around and heal neural cells? We could not have predicted that.
So how do clumps of cells become a self? Let's not forget that you and I, despite our unified experience, are just clumps of cells. Yet we have consciousness, we have dreams, we have motivations, and we have goals. The secret, according to Dr. Michael Levin, is bioelectricity. Bioelectricity is Dr. Michael Levin's real paradigm shift in biology. It's why I think he's going to win a Nobel Prize. Think of it like the electrical language cells use to cooperate, to remember, to build. He's made worms grow 2 heads, eyes on tails, even kickstarted limb regeneration, all by flipping cellular voltages. He's using this exact same system to target cancer, and as we've seen and as we will see throughout this episode, engineer new forms of life. The implications really are staggering, from regenerative medicine, even the impact that synthetic life forms could have on our environment, to cancer research, and maybe even brainless intelligence. Dr. Levin even thinks bioelectricity could be the key to consciousness.
I've heard you talk on podcasts that you're working on your own theory of consciousness. I know we're not going to get to all of it, but can I convince you to drop a few little hints or a few little tidbits of what what your theory of consciousness really involves.
My framework is disturbing on both ends. I think it's all a spectrum, and they're on the same spectrum, and here's why.
Levin, what is a Xenobot?
A Xenobot is a number of things. If you just look at it at first glance, it is a motile, self-controlled, self-assembling little proto-organism made of frog epithelial cells. We liberate those cells from a frog embryo, and they self-assemble into a novel little creature that has behaviors, gene expression, form that's different from it's the default that the frog genome makes. But if you think more deeply about it, it's also a couple of other things. It is also a biorobotics platform. So this is something that Josh Bongard and I, along with team members Doug Blackest and then Sam Kriegman, we were all the original creators of the system, hope to use for beneficial applications in the environment and cleanup and things like that. It is also an exploration tool. It's a kind of periscope that we can use to examine the space of possible forms and behaviors that are reachable from the hardware that's specified by the frog genome. And it's also a tool for exploring the future of form and behavior, more generally in the diverse intelligence field. So it's actually many things.
It's so awesome. You missed out just awesome and amazing science. There's no one in my immediate circle, including my grandmother, who doesn't know what a Xenobot is now. Every time I've been learning about your work and reading about it in the last week, I just couldn't help but be grabbing people off the street and telling people, it's like, have you heard about this thing called a Xenobot? It's incredible.
Yeah.
What did it feel like when you went through all of the work and then for the first time you were looking at it and it was moving and it was doing things that maybe you didn't predict? Like, what was that feeling like?
They do many things we didn't predict, and it's incredible watching them do their thing, watching them finding out that they express hundreds of new genes that the original the transcriptome is massively changed. They express hundreds of genes differently than the original cells in the context of an embryo do. As it turns out, some of those genes relate to perception of sound, and we've, in our latest paper, we've shown that we can actually communicate to them in a simple way by providing vibration stimuli from a speaker under the dish, and we can alter their behavior. And this is something unique. I mean, just watching their behavior is a remarkable feeling, because what you're seeing is the incredible plasticity of life, and the fact that what evolution did here in creating the frog genome is not create a specific solution to a specific environment, meaning frogs and tadpoles. What evolution does create, I think, are problem-solving agents. And under default circumstances, they make the same familiar thing, but under novel circumstances, they figure out new ways to be and new forms of their body shape and behavior. And watching the kinematic replication was one of the most unbelievable things. Why they can't reproduce in the normal frog-like fashion, and so but they figured out a new way of doing it. If you provide them with loose skin cells, they will corral them and make the next generation of bot, which will then go on to do the same thing. And so the feeling is amazing, and it reminds us how insufficient current paradigms are in terms of what is it that the genome actually specifies. How do we do bioengineering? How do we do biomedicine when we try to micromanage molecular states and we target the pathways and with drugs and so on, versus the incredible capacities of the agential material of life, the multi-scale agendas that exist in life at all levels, and the problem solving that comes with it. It's amazing. And then we saw more of this. I don't know, maybe you'll want to talk about this at some point too, is the Anthropobots, which was kind of the next step in all of these. But all of these things are amazing, and I never tire of sort of watching them do their thing.
Absolutely. I love the phrase agential material. It's just a categorical shift, I think, in how people think about agents, that you can have just very, very small microscopic subunits that also sort of engage in this agent-like, intelligent-like behavior. Was that did you predict that at all?
Did you when it started moving around and it started collecting clumps of cells and making versions of itself, which is just a mind-blowing sentence. Was any part of that predicted? Was that in your hypothesis?
So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, the very notion of an agential material. I've been working on this for quite some time, and this kind of I call it a spectrum of persuadability. You know, all the way from mechanical clocks to cybernetic constructs like thermostats and things, and then learning agents like certain living things that can learn, and of course non-living materials that can do it too, and then all the way up through human metacognition and whatever. So this idea that when we're confronted systems, we don't know immediately where they are on that spectrum. It's really popular to have strong opinions about this and to say that, oh well, this is just a mechanical mechanical mechanism. It's got to be all the way on the left. It's got no intelligence and so on. So I've been working for a long time on a framework that facilitates the idea that all of this is an empirical question. You can't just have feelings about how intelligent things are or can be. You have to do experiments, and this is why we found learning in gene regulatory networks and all kinds of problem solving capacities in cells and collectives of cells and tissues and so on. So I felt very strongly, and I predicted many of the things that we found, in the general sense that they would have novel behaviors that are not standard from that you can't predict by looking at their genome, and that they would have all sorts of new behaviors in different spaces. The specifics of what the Xenobots are going to do or what the Anthropobots are going to do, no, we couldn't have predicted that, and in fact, no one could have predicted that. We have very poor ability as a community at this point to predict the goals and the level of intelligence of novel collective systems that we make. We're really, even though we make them all the time, we're not very good at social structures, financial structures, swarm robotics. We're really not very good at predicting that in advance. But and for the Xenobots specifically, there was an important component, which is the AI aspect. So one of the things that Josh Bongard and Sam Kriegman did was to create simulations of the dynamics that they saw some of our bots doing. And what the simulations predicted actually was exactly this phenomenon. So the AI was able to not only predict that this would happen, but also predict ways that we could modify the bots to improve it. And there's one of the experiments in the paper is that we made these bots in kind of like a C shape, like a little Pac-Man sort of thing. And those guys do a better job than the default Xenobots at actually collecting cells and all of that. So the ability to predict these things, I think, is really an existential level importance next step for humanity, because we've been making all kinds of collective intelligences that we really just don't know what the outcome is going to be, and we have to get better, both for practical reasons of engineering and biomedicine, but also for ethical reasons of relating to novel beings in appropriate ways. We're going to have to develop a science of it, and that's the emerging field of diverse intelligence.
Right. What's the right mental model for people that are completely detached from the world of developmental biology to think about what this Xenobot is doing when it's navigating its environment and collecting clumps of cells? Does it know what it's doing? Does it know what it's creating? Does it have goals? Does it have motivations? Is it intelligent? How should we be thinking about this?
The first and most important thing about that question is that is to define terms, because a lot of people throw these words around with the implied belief that we know what these are. So when people say, well, that thing is just it's just doing statistical pattern matching, I really know what I'm talking about. I have real beliefs. That's just a thermostat, or I have real goals. So the first thing to realize is that none of these are easy issues. No one has a complete theory of what it means for us to be able to do any of those things. And really important to realize that this is all an empirical question. So we can't say up front what these things are, what they are actually doing. In fact, I don't believe there is any actually to it. I think there are different sets of models that apply in different ways, and some of them facilitate new discovery, some of them don't. But all of this is an empirical question. So what you could ask is, to what extent, for example, goal-directedness, right? So you could ask, to what extent are there various behaviors goal-directed? And the way you do those experiments, like with anything else in behavioral science, is you put a barrier between them and their goals. In other words, you prevent them from reaching what you think are their goals, and you see what happens. And this is the definition of intelligence by William James. He said it's the ability to reach the same goal by different means. It's how much ingenuity do you have in some problem space, whatever that may be. It may be 3D space, it may not. It may be the goal of reaching particular kinds of gene expression levels when you're faced with various toxins, or reaching a certain position in anatomical space where you have 5 fingers instead of 7 or 2. And so there are many problem spaces, but the idea is, how much ingenuity do you have to navigate that space when there's a novel situation, there's a barrier between you and your goals. So this is a research program. Actually, in the case of the Xenobots, we actually don't know yet. We're doing those experiments now. So being able to say how much intelligence do they have, what kind of intelligence do they have, what do they care about? Do they care about where they are in the physical world? Do they care about where they are in the space of physiological states or metabolic states or gene expression states? All of these things are to be discovered, and we're working on all of this now. But for sure, what you can't do is have strong opinions about that based on the fact that, well, these are just cells, or they don't have a nervous system. By the way, we've made recently Xenobots with a nervous system. This is Hale Forowat's work. We call them neurobots. And you can't assume any of those things. You have to do the experiments, and that's what we're doing now.
How does it, because it doesn't have a way of interacting, or correct me if anything I say here is wrong, it doesn't have a sensor, right? There's no environmental stimulus that it's receiving and then integrating into its decision making at all. Is it all stochastic?
No, so that's not correct. Actually, they have, being epithelial cells that face the outside world, they have a huge number of sensors. They can sense all kinds of different chemicals. They can sense pressure. They can sense electrical properties of the electrical environment around them. They can sense temperature. They can sense probably light, not super clear yet. They have tons of sensors, probably hundreds of different sensors. Now, what is it that they, and by the way, remember that sensors don't just face outwards. So you have all kinds of sensors that face inwards. In other words, you measure your own state, and every cell has tons of sensors that measure their own internal state. So things that are going on, right? Cells can detect and react to things that are going on inside of them. So they have a very rich potential sensory milieu. What do they actually care about is a whole other question. So, these are behavioral experiments that we're doing now. So do they respond to, for example, one thing we found is that they respond to vibrations of the kind that you get from sound. So this is the most recent paper led by Vipaf Pai from my group, where we looked at the Xenobots, compare them to the normal cells that they come from. We found there's some hundreds of genes that are upregulated, and we found that some of them are in this cluster related to hearing. And we thought, well, that's pretty weird. Why would you do that? Well, what could they possibly hear? And so we tried. We stuck a speaker under the dish, and we found that, when you turn on certain sounds, their behavior changes very, sort of detectively. And then when you cut off the sound, they go back almost to what they were doing before. Not quite. So they might have a kind of memory for it, but pretty much they return to what they were doing before. So they can certainly sense that. What else they can sense is a huge open area, because we would like to use them for environmental sensing, for detection of all kinds of interesting things, and that we don't know how to detect directly. So figuring out what their world looks like, what do they pay attention to, and how do they make decisions, and how much memory do they have. That's actually, we're preparing a paper right now. It should be out later this year on memory. They can remember things they've encountered in their environment.
Amazing. That was an important distinction to make, I think, because in my head, it was a lot less complex than it is, and it is just marvelous what groups of cells clumped together can do. I know we
sorry, just to pick up on that for a second. Just remember that you and I are clumps of cells too, and
Absolutely.
Right, and so it is absolutely marvelous what clumps of cells can do. But with the right cognitive glue, with the right policies that bind individual cells together into larger units, and by the way, the same thing that binds individual molecular reactions into a cell, because learning and memory start long before you have actual cells. The material inside your cells is already cognitive to an important degree. So right. The way all of these things come together, it is absolutely amazing. But it's everywhere, throughout. By the time you get to multicellular constructs like Xenobots, of course. All these things are there.
Yeah. I think my bias is towards nervous systems being the important cognition center, right? Because I studied neuroscience in college, so I always think something without a nervous system, I mean, it's going to be very basic, but that is being insulting the beautiful engineering of individual cells. As you correctly point out, that's all we are, is just billions of them glued together.
Yeah, well, and I don't mean to minimize that. I'm not saying that's all they are in the sense of that. I'm saying that is what they are. It's an amazing. Well, that's what we are. It's an amazing example of collective intelligence, right? And the thing about the nervous system, I mean, obviously, nervous systems are really cool, but part of our bias, and we all have this bias innately. Part of our bias comes from the firmware we inherited from evolution. We are, as humans and as scientists, we are obsessed with a three-dimensional world. So when we that we see, and so when we think about intelligence, what you primarily think about is navigating this space. You think about animal movement first of all, and you also we are also primed to recognize intelligence in things that are medium size, move at medium speeds. Not too fast, not too slow, not too large, not too small. Anything that and that is what we are tuned for by our evolutionary history. And the mission, as I see it, the mission of the diverse intelligence field is to do for intelligence what physicists did for example, for the electromagnetic spectrum. So think back to what this was like before we understood electromagnetism. First of all, we had a bunch of phenomena that we thought were all different. So lightning, static electricity, light, waving magnets around, all these things we thought were completely different things. Turns out they're all fundamentally part of the same thing, which is really important. And we were completely blind because of our natural evolved hardware. We were completely blind to huge aspects of that spectrum. Once we had a good theory, not only did we understand how to unify all these things into one, we were also able to develop technology to exploit the other parts of that spectrum. So the exact same thing, I think, happens with the space of cognition. We see things, we see cells doing things in other spaces that are not three-dimensional space. We see materials doing memory. We see decision-making in collectives, and we think, well, that's not the same thing. I am a unified intelligence. Never mind that you're a whole bunch of neural and other cell types. But you think, okay, I'm a singular intelligence. This bee colony or this group of cells in an organ, that's something different. And we are terrible at noticing and communicating with other intelligences that are not like us. They're everywhere, right? In our body, outside our body. And so that's, to me, that's the same process. Like, it's natural that we start at neurons and at behavior the way we did with electromagnetism, but it's, we have to make tools and concepts that get us past that.
Right.
While ChatGPT can be great, I've found that specifically in areas that are pretty uncertain, like all of neuroscience, that it can also get things horribly wrong, and it's just not a reliable source of scientific information. This is why I have personally used Consensus.ai for over a year now, and I literally would not be able to do my job without it. Think of Consensus as the ChatGPT for science, trained on actual research papers and designed to give you differing perspectives when something isn't really as clear-cut. Let's test this out with a really controversial one that basically no one in the field can agree on. Is serotonin related to depression? As expected, so very mixed, although I don't know if I've ever seen it quite this mixed before. So it gets 69% yes, 6% possibly, 6% mixed, and 19% no. You can break down where it's getting these scores from, what papers, what year. Again, it's just weighting the evidence in such a clever way so you can understand what you need to understand. And a new feature that I absolutely love is that they have threads introduced, so you can probe down into deeper levels. What is the efficacy of SSRIs? Again, super controversial, really interesting though, and a really important question. And threads just allow you to go deeper, deeper, and deeper and understand that nuance at every single level. It's really why I love it. It's integral to my job. And the amazing news is that you can try out Consensus.ai for a full year completely free with the code Giant Shoulder in the description. That's right, I didn't say a 7-day free trial where you forget to cancel and suddenly you're $100 down. No, this is a full year, so there is literally no harm in trying it out. You just have to have one scientific question that you want a good answer to. Maybe it's how much creatine I should be taking in the morning, or should I be taking it in the morning or at night? Is consciousness fundamental, or why is the star-nosed mole just objectively the best mammal? Questions that keep you up at night. There's no better tool than consensus.ai. I love that they're a sponsor of the channel and I couldn't be more appreciative. Please go try them out. It really supports what we're doing.
We like to think we're uniquely special and that these human principles only operate at the level of full, complete organisms, humans, other animals. But it's bizarre to think that these tiny subunits could also be doing. Do you think do we need more language? Is it a language problem? Do you think we need different words for describing cellular cognition compared to human cognition? Or do you think they exist? They should exist rightfully on the same continuum.
Well, I absolutely think they exist on the same continuum. And the way we know that is because we can take concepts that were traditionally used for behavioral and cognitive neuroscience, and we can use those same exact concepts profitably in other sciences. So I'll give you an example. And I used to have my students do this by hand, and now we've actually made a tool. I could give you a link online. There's an online tool that does it for you now. You take any neuroscience paper and you just do a find or replace. Okay, and so anytime it says neuron, you say cell. Anytime it says millisecond, you say minute. And then you can do some other pivots because instead of three-dimensional space, you're talking about anatomical amorphous space. But you make those changes. That's it. Everything else fits. You got yourself a developmental biology paper, because all of the concepts. I mean, we've used it all. The tools, optogenetics, neurotransmitter modulation, ion channels, electrical synapses, the concepts, perceptual bistability, illusions, memory, active inference. You name it. We've used all of this stuff in Morphogenesis. Because and it works because our cognition is homologous, not just similar to or not just analogous to, but actually homologous to the morphogenetic intelligence. That is where it evolved from. All of the things, all of the tricks that the brain uses to do counterfactuals, to have memory, to do goal-directed behavior, all of these are ancient. They predate neurons by a really long time.
Right.
And what evolution did was basically speed up electrical and neurotransmitter processes, and then it pivoted them from the original space they operated in, which was anatomical space. The first use case for this was to navigate anatomical space, and then it got pivoted to when nerve and muscle appear to kind of run around this three-dimensional space. So all of the concepts transfer. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have to broaden some of them, and there will be some aspects of memory, for example, in gene regulatory networks that aren't exactly like all the kinds of memory that we study in psychology, right? So there will be some, you'll need to make some tweaks, but overall, it's exactly the same. But again, the bigger, so the practical point is that it's absolutely a continuum, and the way you know it's a continuum is that you can move concepts back and forth. People often say to me, it's confusing when you use the same terms. You should come up with different terms, and then you won't have to fight with anybody. So we do memory, and then the cells do shmemory. And it's fine. Those are different things, and you can, right? But the problem with that is that it's actually it's a barrier to new discovery. Because the whole point is that it then tells you, pretending that these are different categories keeps you from porting tools and concepts. And for the same reason that Newton wouldn't have been wise to say, well, gravity is the thing that makes the apple fall, but schmavity for the moon, then we'll have these two different things, right? For exactly the same reason that would have been a mistake. You don't want to make up new names for this unless you actually find out that the tools don't work, and then it's a different phenomenon. But the other important philosophical point here is that I don't believe it's the case that everything is one thing, and our goal is to discover what it really is, and we can fight about it for a while, but then eventually we'll sort of figure out what it really is, and then we can move on. Philosophically, I think that's the wrong way to think about this. I think that the spectrum of cognition, or as I call it, the spectrum of persuadability, is when you say this system has a particular degree of intelligence or a degree of cognition, what I think you're really saying is what you're talking about are interaction protocols. And this is a very engineering, I mean, I'm an engineer, it's a very engineering perspective. What you're really saying is, here is the bag of tools I plan to use with this thing. Maybe it's hardware rewiring. Maybe it's changing set points from control theory and cybernetics. Maybe it's training from behavior theory. Maybe it's psychoanalysis, the friendship, love, whatever it's going to be. Here is the set of tools I'm going to use to interact with the system. Watch how well I do, and then we'll all see how well it works out. And so what this means is that there isn't one thing that anything is. I mean, all of these terms, they're metaphors, they're mental models. They're not, nothing is anything in the sense of these things. Nothing is a computer, nothing is a machine or an organism. All these are all metaphors that bring a set of tools with them. And so it's perfectly possible to have one object, a cell. You can look at a Xenobot and you can say that is a biological robot. Or you can say, no, that is a proto-organism. Or we can say, no, that is a set of cognitive propensities, or that is a discovery tool for regenerative medicine, or it's right. So depending on, I'm going to use it like an organoid to find to screen drugs for regenerative medicine. No, I'm going to interact with it on a cognitive level and see what it knows, and I'm going to treat it as a proto-organism. Or no, I'm going to make I'm going to use it like a biorobotics platform and have it clean up the waterways. All of these are valid. It's not what it really is. It's what do you see in that system, and what bag of tools can you use, and how did that work out for you? It's a very sort of experimental kind of thing.
Right. It's so well said. I think it's so well explained. I think biology runs into a lot of traps with language, because language, by nature of language, is discrete, right? Here's a box, here's a category, here's a box, here's a category. But the more I learn about biology, and how you so eloquently put it there, is that everything exists on spectrums and continuums, and language is just kind of tricking our brain into thinking that these things fit into discrete boxes. It's the same with psychiatric conditions and diagnoses. Like autism, these things are spectrums of phenotypic behaviors, but everything is far more complex than these niche labeled boxes. And there's something about the brain that also really likes categorization and chunking as a way of memorizing and learning fields. We put things into discrete boxes, but it tricks us in a lot of ways. It's hard to get out of that, hard to, I think of things entirely in continuums and spectrums, when language has been kind of tricking us our whole life into thinking they're discrete boxes.
Yeah, it's and it's not just biology. It's everywhere. Regular people who are not biologists or anything will always tell you, well, I know the difference. There's live and there's dead. There's living and there's machine. There's true minds, and then there's faking it with tricks. These things, they are also an important frame. These categorizations are an important frame. And the way that I explain it is like the word adult. Okay, so we have the word adult because in the court system and social policies, it lubricates that whole thing by saying, hey, look, on the night of your 18th birthday, bang, you're now an adult. Okay, and all that does, it's a very expedient, practical thing, and if you want to rent a car, it's actually 25, and with whatever it is, and so you make up these things, but let's not then pretend that this is real. We know nothing happens on the night of your 18th birthday. And if you really want to talk about what an adult is, you have to fundamentally unpack the nature of personal responsibility and metamorphosis and maturation and change. And are you the same person you used to be because you grew up, or because you had a brain tumor, or a neurotransmitter insufficiency? And how did you get here from being a single cell in embryogenesis anyway? At what point did you acquire this magical property of being responsible for your actions? What could that possibly even mean, right? So all these questions, you don't want to address all of these questions every time you need to register to vote or whatever, right? And just say, oh my God, what really is a human responsibility? So we make up these easy categories, live and dead, or like all of these things. But when you dig into these things, you find out that if you really want to understand what's going on, to really get at the nature of it, what you want is not some sort of binary category, which inevitably there will be crazy corner cases on things that we don't know how to categorize and whatever. What you really want is to understand the process of transformation. What is actually happening to increase your adulthood? How did you, because there was no magic lightning bolt that made it happen. What are the processes that increase it from the time you're a cell to the time that you're a modern human, adult human? So these things, it's really important that these categories, to remember that these categories that we make up, they're just convenient metaphors that we use to make life simple. They obscure the underlying a continuous nature of things. I have debates with people all the time where they try to come up with examples and say, okay, well, here, how about this? Surely this is a binary category. And then I sort of zoom in and I show them how, no, actually, here's the in-between case. I can only think of one example. I'm not even sure I believe that one, where I think it really is, where it might be binary. And that's certain things in quantum mechanics. But otherwise, pretty much everything that we care about is a continuous spectrum. And the far more interesting story is the movement across that spectrum. It's not trying to maintain these categories.
Right. I'm really curious about the development of when the Xenobot is clumping its pile of cells together. And you speak of everything as a continuum. That clump of cells is getting bigger and bigger. At what point does it start exhibiting the behaviors of the Xenobot that is creating it? Does it have movement right away? Is it able to repair itself? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's a really complicated idea for me. That does it, if it's all a continuum, is it at the level of one cell already exhibiting some of the properties of the whole parent Xenobot? And then as it gets more complex, as more cells are added and added and added, it starts to look more like its buddy that it's being created by. Have you charted that sort of relationship? How as that clump of cell gets bigger and bigger, sure, and sort of how it gets more intelligent, and speak around that a bit, because that was kind of breaking my brain trying to think about how that relationship works.
Yeah, we absolutely have, because one of the beautiful things about these kinds of models is that they're right there in front of you on the benchtop. You can record the whole thing. It is definitely a journey, because the initial bot, it does not move. It's immotile, and then eventually it does move. But the transition, of course, is slow and gradual, because the way that it starts to move is it grows these cilia, right? So these little waving hairs that come out of that grow out of every cell that row. They basically row against the water, which is how this thing propels forward. So think about what happens. You have to be covered in, I don't know, thousands and thousands of cilia. Well, how many do you have at any given moment is a question. And once you start moving, it's kind of like a baby. Do babies move through the world? I mean, kind of, but better at 6 months than at 1 month, and better in a couple of years. So same thing. They sort of start wiggling, and then they sort of start, and then eventually the cilia align so that they can row in opposite directions, and the thing actually moves forward. So yeah, you can watch that developmental process. It is slow and gradual, like all developmental biology. Everything is slow and gradual. And then it acquires, and some of these bots are better at, if you say, you can't say, can it do kinematic replication? The question is how well, because we can make a whole spectrum of ones that are really good at it. We can make ones that are not as good at it. And that's what you see. You see as they develop, first they're not that good at it. Then eventually it really cranks up. They do great. And then eventually a few days later, they sort of degrade and start to die. And then it stops again. So yeah, continuum all the way.
And does it make exact copies of itself, or rough copies of itself with errors?
Good question. This is not what I would call strong heredity, in the sense that when they make the thing about standard reproduction is that what happens is that the offspring that you make are more similar to the parents than they are to random members of the population. Yeah, so there's some sort of you pass on whatever traits you have. At this point in Xenobots, we don't have any evidence for that. We don't know that it's not doing that, but we don't have any evidence for it. They basically, all the bots make standard bots. There is a bunch of variability there. They're not all identical. There is a range of parameters in terms of the shape, the speed with which they move, the different kinds of behaviors that they do, and so on. There's a spectrum, and we don't have any evidence that a particular bot that makes another bot, that one would be more similar to its parent than to any other bot that was made in that same dish. So it's sort of again on the spectrum. Like, is it reproduction? Well, it's missing some of the features, but it certainly has other features. So it's not whether it is or it isn't. It's what are the metaphors that you move forward in discovery.
Why did you even think to sprinkle those cells in the dish? Is that one of the products of the computer algorithm that said it might do this if you sprinkle its component parts sort of around it?
That AI didn't have the ability to predict to suggest new experiments like that. That was something that Josh and Doug and Sam and I thought about. We watched the movement, and one of the things that we studied early on is to sprinkle a bunch of passive particles in there, because the particles let you they let you see the movement of the water as the cilia are beating. It's really cool. You can these tiny little particles that reflect light, and you can sort of see all the vortices and everything else that's happening in the water as this thing progresses. But watching it displace those particles and watching them collect in little piles and so on, it became obvious that these things exert force on the environment around them. And we wondered, okay, we can see what they do with a passive material. What would they do with an agential material that, once you do collect it into piles, isn't just going to sit there as a pile? It's going to do what cells do, which is to try to create something bigger. And some of the videos, I can send you a link to some of these things, are absolutely incredible. When you watch what the cells are doing as they're being gathered into a pile, there are so many levels of life here. There's the collective, so there's a population, and there's 20 bots doing this dance, and they're all moving when they're interacting with each other, and they all of that goes into redistributing the cells. Then there's the individual bots, and the individual bots interacting with the cells and with the water. And then there are the cells themselves. And you can watch as they're being placed into these piles, what are the cells doing and how do they start to come together. And then, of course, inside the cells are the molecular networks, which now we can also read out via calcium signaling. So we have a couple papers coming out looking at taking techniques that are normally used to analyze brain function, so calcium imaging, right, in neural systems, and we've applied that to Xenobots. And there's some amazing properties. There's some amazing properties, and in fact, we compare them head to head. Here are things like various statistical and causal geometry kinds of metrics of what happens in the nervous system under different kinds of cognition, and then here's what happens in Xenobots. So you can see it head to head what the differences and similarities are.
That's so cool. Is there anything specific? I presume there isn't something magical about the Xenopus frog. If you took the exact configuration of cells, but substituted them all for the albino silverback gorilla, random example, no idea why I went there, but would you be able to make any predictions of what that system would do? Would it act in a completely different way? Is there anything you can predict about that system?
Well, a couple things. First of all, no, I don't believe there's anything unique about the frog system. We did it because it's very tractable and easy to use and all of that stuff. In particular, though, there's an issue kind of like what we discussed at the beginning, which is this: if we had done it with a set of cells that don't have cilia, they wouldn't be moving around in the three-dimensional world, and they might be doing all kinds of cool things. They might be moving through transcriptional space and physiological space. And we could and do chart all of that. And I will say to people, look, this is behavior. This thing is navigating space. It's avoiding local barriers. It's got delayed gratification, whatever it's doing. And people will say, that's not behavior. That's something else. Let's call it physiology. And I'll say, yeah, but we're using all the tools of training and, visual illusions and all this stuff and so on. That's the fight that you have to have. But when the thing is moving in three-dimensional space, it's easier for people to see what's going on. And so that's why, that's why we started with ciliated cells, because you don't want to fight every battle at once. You want to be able to say, look, this really is behavior. We can all agree it's behavior. Now let's talk about what that means in non-neural cells. But we also study a bunch of other things that are not moving in 3D space. And I frankly think that the vast majority of organoids that people make that don't move, that just sit there in a dish, I think they have the equivalent of locked-in syndrome, meaning that there's tons of processes going on. They're solving all kinds of problems. They're communicating to us. They're doing all sorts of interesting things. We are blind to it just because we're so fixated on the three-dimensional world. So for that reason, we chose ciliated cells. Now, with respect to making this out of other animals, let's talk about Anthropobots for a second. So when we made these Xenobots, one of the things that some people said was, okay, well, they're amphibian cells, and we know amphibian cells are pretty plastic. They're embryonic cells, and we know embryonic cells are plastic. So maybe this is some sort of a frog specific thing. It's a weird quirk of frog developmental biology. People have been using animal caps, which is where these cells come from, for a long time. People have seen them wiggle around. Nobody's kind of made anything of it, but that's been seen for a long time. So maybe this is just some aspect of frog developmental biology. It's like this weird fluke one-off. And so at that point I thought, okay, let's get as far away from embryonic frog that we can. And what would that be? Well, an adult human. And say, fine, let's go to an adult human. Nothing to do with frogs, nothing to do with embryos, nothing to do with amphibian morphogenesis or animal caps or any of that. Let's see what adult human cells do. And so this is Gizem Gamushkaya, who got her PhD in my lab recently, developed a protocol for basically taking tracheal epithelial cells donated by human donors. Some of them may or may not be alive after this. So it's a weird kind of, as these things are running in our lab, it's a weird kind of life after death for some of these patients. But what we found is something very interesting. First of all, they do something similar to what Xenobots do, meaning they self-assemble. They make this basic, simple architecture where it's basically a spherical thing with cilia on the outside that then runs around. So that's similar. Instead of hundreds of altered gene expressions, they have thousands, about 9,000. So about half the genome is radically differently expressed. They have, similar to the Xenobots, they have a small set of discrete behaviors, and you can draw an ethogram of the transition probabilities between the different behaviors, just like you would for any animal, fish or whatever. They have all sorts of interesting capacity. So let's take stock. Could we have predicted the fact that this would work with other species? We could, and we did. I did predict that, and we did in fact find that. Could you predict what the shape of it was going to be and what the behaviors are going to be? Sort of. You could have predicted that it would be similar, but actually that's not a super strong prediction because there are other differences that we couldn't have predicted. Could we have said which genes were going to be altered? We could not, and that's because what I think is going on here is that as we see, they say, well, it's the genome drives, right? Because dogs have puppies and cats have kittens, and it's the genome that drives. Well, yeah, but the human genome also makes Xenobots, and the Anthropobots and the frog genome makes Xenobots, and so on. It's the genome has a set of affordances that the cells can exploit. So they can express different genes because of a new lifestyle. I mean, think about what's happened here. There are no scaffolds. There's no genomic editing. There's no synthetic biology circuits being knocked in. There are no weird drugs or nanomaterials. There's none of it. It's just a different lifestyle. You're living in the same environment you would have been living in anyway, but the other cells aren't there to tell you what to do. So you're liberated in a way, right? The normal, for example, in Xenobots, those epithelial cells would normally be sort of bullied by the other cells into being this boring two-dimensional outer surface to keep out the bacteria. In the absence of that, they do whatever they want to do, which is this. And so how much of that could we have predicted? So we certainly predicted that it would happen, but the specifics of it, no way. We had no idea which genes they were going to turn on, or the fact that, for example, Anthropobots, if you take a bunch of human neurons and you grow them on a lawn on a petri dish, and then you take a scalpel and you put a big scratch through it, so like a wound, through a neural network on a dish. You put the Anthropobots in, they sort of run around. Some of them will find the wound. They settle at a particular location in the wound. They form this larger structure we call a superbot cluster, which might have 8 to 10 bots. And 4 days later, you lift them up and you see what they were doing while they were sitting there. Is they knitting the two sides together. So they were actually healing the gap. Like we could have. Who would have known that your tracheal cells, right? It's absolutely amazing. Who would have known that your tracheal cells that sit there quietly in your airway, dealing with pollen and whatnot, have the ability to run around and heal neural cells? We could not. We could not have predicted that. And something else that's important is that ability was not experiment 82 out of 1,000 things we checked. That was the first thing we tried. That was the first damn thing we tried. And so what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that they probably do 1,000 other things that we just don't know about, that we don't, we're not smart enough yet to check. I mean, we're now going through and looking for all kinds of other things. But that was just, it was just a total, total luck. But it's not a needle in a haystack. They have no doubt, they have tons of these capacities. And the question is, and I think this is really important. Anytime anytime you try to establish or claim the cognitive capacity of a system, it's a two-way IQ test. What you're really doing is taking an IQ test yourself. What you're saying is, how smart was I to be able to determine what space is it working in, what are its goals, what capacities does it have to meet those goals, and design experiments to show that. All this is, it's a reflection of our own largely inability to deal with minds that are radically different from our own. So that's the tools that we're trying to make now.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It really does feel like it's conscious. And I'm going to define what I'm considering conscious here so that everyone is on the same page, where it seems like they have subjective experience. There's some experience of what it is like to be the Xenobot or the Arthropod. It's sensing the environment, it's reacting, it's integrating its signal, it's responding, it's learning in some ways. As you can say, there's ways to communicate it. Like, for me, at least, that absolutely passes the bar of if this thing is conscious.
So let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, just to be clear, I have not claimed, and I don't think anybody on our team has claimed anything about consciousness for these things for a couple of reasons.
Hearing those reasons.
So we haven't. I haven't said they're not. Because again, I don't think you can just sort of sit back and have opinions on this. You have to do experiments. But I haven't said one way or the other. And but I can say a couple of things. Consciousness is obviously a very difficult issue. We're not going to resolve it in the next 15 minutes. But there are two things. There are two things here to think about. The first is that typically there are three kinds of reasons that people that people use to attribute consciousness to others. So this is the other minds problem, right? So you and I presumably think that each other is conscious. Now, why would that be? We don't have direct access to each other's minds. Why do I think you're conscious? So people typically like three reasons. One reason is behavior. It's all the things that you just said. Does it have goal-directed behavior? Does it seem to have valence about what it, preferences about what it's going to do? Does it have learning? All those so publicly observable behaviors. Now, okay, and so that's one. And some people don't like those because they'll say, well, a guided munitions like a self-homing bomb has all of these things. It's got goal-directed behavior, and some of them can learn from experience and blah blah blah. Right? So some people don't like the behavioral, but other people do. Then you've got the architecture argument. So it's like, look, I know I'm conscious. I know what I'm made of, presumably, and if you're made of the same stuff, then probably you're the same. So if we look at that. So what are we made of? We've got some ion channels, we've got some gap junctions, we've got some neurotransmitter pathways. All of the organs in your body, all of the systems in your body are continuous with that. You have all that machinery exists in every cell in your body. There are electrical networks throughout your body that make decisions about morphogenesis. So what I have claimed about all of this. So we've got behavior, we've got composition, and then we've got evolutionary lineage. Right. So you and I come from the same path on the evolutionary tree. So if I think I'm conscious, then I'm going to say probably you are too. So using any of those criteria, and I'm not aware of really any other. I mean, there's things like IIT where they look at information, like causal architecture in the information structure and so on. But typically, what I have claimed about consciousness in general is that for the exact same reasons you attribute consciousness to some other beings, you should be very serious about attributing it about the potential for it to exist in other organs and tissues of your body for the exact same reasons. The fact that you don't have access to it doesn't mean anything. In other words, my left hemisphere doesn't have access to your consciousness either. So of course I don't feel my liver being conscious, but we should be open to that possibility because that material does all the same behaviors in different spaces, but it does all the same behaviors. It is in evolutionary continuity and it has all the same composition. It has the same mechanisms. So we should be open to that. However, what that doesn't address is is what they call the hard problem of what is it actually like to be that creature. And if I absolutely think that Xenobots have an inner perspective. I don't claim it. We don't have any data on it. It's very hard to do these things that we can't even really strongly do that for each other. But as much as we can, my suspicion is that, of course, they do. But then again, I think that very widely across across the universe, extremely wide. That experience is actually extremely widely distributed. Some degree of it is extremely widely distributed across the universe. But what I can't do is tell you what kind of what is it like to be a Xenobot? What kind of consciousness does it have? What is it actually aware of? What is the valence? We don't have those data yet. When we do have those data, we will be able to have the same kind of discussion that we currently have about lots of different animals, insects, insects. Well, for example, one of the things that people talk about in bees and so on is self-medication. They'll say that insects will, they'll if they lose a limb or something, they will try to either try to so sometimes certain animals will seek out analgesics in the environment. Others will sort of groom it. They show that they're aware of the thing. They show that there's so we can have those same kind of discussions. That still doesn't get you across the so-called hard problem, but for sure we can have those same discussions. There will be an additional twist to it, because again, it'll go beyond three-dimensional behavior. So if you're a being that lives and navigates it lives in and navigates an entirely different space. Let's say the space of physiological states or anatomical morphospace instead of the three-dimensional world. But that is where you have your perception action loop. You take sensor readings, you have memories, you make decisions, you have beliefs about priors about what happened before, you have goals you're trying to reach, you have ingenuity about getting around that space, all of that. What is it like what is the consciousness like of a being that inhabits one of these other worlds, And I think it's there. I personally absolutely think it's there. But being able to say something about it that's useful is an entirely different matter. So I think we have to be careful. I'm of course very open, because I think all living material and probably lots of non-living material has some kind of experience. But being able to say what that is requires a lot of work that hasn't been done yet.
Yes, I completely agree. I think a past guest of the podcast, Peter Godfrey Smith, alongside Anil Seth, I think have been the biggest influencers for me on this view of how subjectivity might have emerged, how an experience of it to be that organism might have evolved, and why we should very strongly consider the idea that everything from bacteria up and smaller even and less complex, it has some sort of consciousness, but it's basically impossible for us to understand it or to sympathize with it or to even compare. Maybe you disagree. I've heard you talk on podcasts that you're working on your own theory of consciousness. I know we're not going to get to all of it, but can I convince you to drop a few little hints or a few little tidbits of what your theory of consciousness really involves?
Well, I can talk about what we are doing that bears on it. It's not the actual theory isn't nearly ready yet to say anything strong. But here's one thing I can say. Both Anil and Peter and a lot of folks in the field, some of the most radical ones extend sort of down into insects and things like this, and then there's a community in the diverse intelligence field. There's a community that will go to plants and single cells. František Beluska and Pamela Line and so on will go to bacteria and single cell and plants. There's a great community working on plant intelligence and all that. I am sort of way more radical than this, because I don't actually think there's anything. If you want that spectrum to stop somewhere, you have to specify what the secret sauce is. What is the special thing? And I don't think it's the material. I don't think there's anything special about being proteinaceous. I don't think that it's the origin story. I don't think there's any magic in having derived from a random meanderings of mutation and selection. I don't think that's necessary for making minds. I think it's much more basic than that. And I catch flack from that community too by putting what they call machines on that same spectrum. So it's really quite disturbing. So my framework is disturbing on both ends. The sort of mechanist molecular biology folks say, well, this is really bad. You're bringing some sort of cognition into molecular events, things that should be the province of chemistry. And I say, but we've shown Pavlovian conditioning in molecular networks. Like it's the same, it's the same stuff. But anyway, but they want to keep it to chemistry. And then on the other end, you have people who, in the organicist tradition, who have said, look, we've for hundreds of years we've fought against the mechanization of life, the reduction of life to simple machines, and now you're putting these machines on the same spectrum as you're going to devalue basically the whole majesty of living minds. I think it's all a spectrum, and they're on the same spectrum, and here's why. What I found is that in very simple systems, and I'll tell you briefly what they are, but very simple systems that are in no way alive, that are not evolved, that are not that are actually deterministic, you already get the kind of surprising behaviors, and in fact, some behaviors you would recognize as cognitive capacities. You already get that, and what I claim is that for the exact same reasons that the laws of chemistry don't tell the whole story of, let's say, a human mind, the laws of computer science, meaning algorithms, the description of algorithms and the materials, don't actually tell the whole story of even very simple machines. This magic that we're talking about, this ability to have goals and cognitive properties that are not prescribed by the physics of your organism nor by the materials, but seem to be something more than that. That's real. I think that's absolutely real, but it's not limited to living things. It emerges extremely early in the kind of ladder of complexity. You don't need to be complex. And to kind of nail this down in the most disruptive way possible, I took the most the simplest thing I could think of, which is sorting algorithms. So like bubble sort, like these are very simple algorithms, 6 lines of code, completely deterministic. People have they're designed to sort arrays of numbers from a jumbled up mess into a sequence of numbers. And so this is the work of Taining Zhang and Adam Goldstein, 2 of my students. What we basically did, these algorithms have been studied by generations of computer science students. Everybody studies them for 60 years or more. And nobody noticed the following thing: that if you look at them in a particular way, if you actually treat them as potential agents, which doesn't look like they are because it's just 6 lines of deterministic code. How much agency could it have? If you actually are willing to suspend your armchair beliefs about it and actually do experiments and actually see, well, what is this thing capable of? What you find out is that same algorithm, that exact same algorithm, it sorts numbers, all right, but at the same time, it does some other stuff that is nowhere in the algorithm. And it has these little side quests, these weird little side quests that it does while it's doing that. And I think it's an extremely minimal model of what we see in life, which is, you're subject to the laws of physics and chemistry, and you can't do anything that is disallowed in the laws of physics and chemistry. And yet you will do things that, while not prohibited by those laws, are neither prescribed by them. And that degree of, people call it emergence, and I don't like that word at all. And so I have a whole other framework for thinking about them that's very Platonist, kind of like Platonist mathematics and so on. We can talk about that separately, which is then this is going to get to the theory of consciousness, because I don't think we make minds. I don't think we create consciousness. I don't think we do it when we make an embryo. I don't think we do it when we make an AI or an embedded robotic system. I think we facilitate the ingression of certain patterns from that Platonic space, and this is where we get to a completely sort of different theory of consciousness. Because and the reason I can talk about this now where I couldn't before is precisely because of the Xenobots and the Anthropobots. It's because typically when you have in biology, when you have any kind of an animal or a plant, you say, well, what explains the shape and the behavior that it has? The standard answer is evolution, a history of selection. It was selected to be this or that. Well, Anthropobots, there's never been any Anthropobots. There's never been selection to be a good Xenobot. Where did their shape and behaviors come from? And that leads to a deep question of, where do mathematical truths come from? Where do forms come from? Things that are not dependent on the physical world, that you could change anything you wanted in the physical universe. You could not change the value of E or the shape of certain fractal structures or whatever. There's nothing you can do in the physical world to change that. So that eventually that gives you the flavor of what's going on. But the idea is that magic that we associate with cognition, with freedom, with open-endedness, it doesn't take life, it doesn't take cells, it doesn't take minds, or it doesn't take brains or neurons or anything like that. It is baked into the most simple elements of the universe.
That is radical. I cannot wait until you have that fully packed into a book or a paper or something. I can't wait. if I could leave with one final question, Mike, it's been so much fun. I think I could talk to you for 1,000 hours and still not even be remotely bored. You're an incredible scientific speaker and just mind, and it's a privilege to be able to talk to you.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Is there any part of the scientific work that you've done that you're scared of? That you're in the back of your mind, you're kind of fearful of where it could evolve, where it could go to, or what it might look like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
There are two things. The thing that I'm scared of all the time is the failure to live up to the potential of regenerative medicine. So it's not. I think when people always ask about ethical implications, I think they're typically thinking about it in this way: everything's cool, everything's good now, and you scientists better not screw it up. So what are you afraid of that's going to happen? I go in the opposite direction. I say, look around. Things are absolutely not cool. I get email. I'm not even a clinician. I get emails every day from people in the most incredible medical suffering. The environment is a mess. All of these things, inaction and the inability to learn what we need to learn to elevate and enable people to have the embodiment that they want, right, is I think would be a huge moral lapse. I think we have an ethical responsibility to get these things to the point where everybody can have the embodiment that they want and are not subject to the whims of cosmic rays that hit their embryonic cells when they were an embryo. And so that's the first thing. So the fear of not living up to that, I think, is absolutely real. And the other thing is there's some issues, not particularly of my work, but the ability to recognize other minds that are not like ours means that we have to radically redo our ethics. And that, I mean, that's not just me. That's not my work in particular. It's the fact that when you make tools to see that, my God, there are other intelligences that we never recognized before. That's a major responsibility, and that's scary.
I love it. You completely flipped the question on me, which I think you do, which you tend to do with everything, which I absolutely love. Mike, this has been such genuine privilege of a lifetime.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it a lot.
So much fun. I'll have
Thank
to
you.
have you back on because we
Absolutely.
get the bioelectricity.
Yeah.
Valerian worms. There's just so much I wanted to go into, but we don't have the time. But
anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Incredible, absolutely amazing. An inspiration as a communicator, and all the work you're doing is just so unbelievably impactful. It's hard to even quantify.
I appreciate that very much. Happy to talk again. I'll see you.
Pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thanks.
Dr. Michael Levin, what an absolute legend. It's the honor and privilege of a lifetime that I get to do this full time, and I have you to thank for it. So thank you so much for watching to the end of the episode. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you're looking for more, then I think you should go to Nick Lane next. He's an incredible scientific communicator. Thank you so much for the support. I'll see you next time.